Hello and welcome. My name is Kevin, and our program today is Then and Now, Our Legacy. The largest collection of artifacts that we have at the Siouxland Heritage Museums are our historic photographs, over 60,000 of them. Historic photographs can be a wonderful tool as we learn our community's history. Our program today, we're going to take a look at how many locations in our community looked then, over 100 years ago, and how they may look today. Let's get started. The story of the largest city in South Dakota is a fascinating one. And here we have an aerial view of the community. From the bustling activity in Sioux Falls today, it's hard to imagine how the area may have looked over 100 years ago. But we do have some clues. If you look closely at this photograph, you'll notice that this is the intersection of 41st Street and Louise Avenue, the busiest intersection in the state of South Dakota. This 1702 French map of the Missouri Valley indicates the location of the Big Sioux River. The first recorded visit of white men to the falls of the Big Sioux River was in the year 1832. Now, if we look closely at our map, the dark black line here would be the Missouri River. And the Big Sioux is this river right here at the top. We do get a slight mention in the Lewis and Clark journals. In 1804, as Lewis and Clark traveled up the Missouri River, at the mouth of the Big Sioux River, near present-day Sioux City, Iowa, they met a French fur trapper who told them if they go up the river about 70 miles, they'll hit a falls, and that's as far as they can go. That's our slight mention in the Lewis and Clark journals. Because of the wonderful reports written about this area, the Western Town Company of Dubuque, Iowa, sent out a party in 1856 to claim 320 acres upstream or south of the falls on the east side of the river. In 1857, the Dakota Land Company of St. Paul claimed 320 acres downstream or north of the falls on the same side of the river. This is an early 1870s photograph of the falls of the Big Sioux. Take a look at the background. That hill that you see there would be North Main Avenue today. Notice that we have no houses, no streets, no power lines. Sioux Falls is indeed an open prairie. Due to hostilities in nearby Madary, just south of present-day Brookings, Sioux Falls' first settlers decided to build a fort for their protection. This civilian fort stood on the banks of the Big Sioux River. 10-foot-high walls of logs and mud were built 4 feet thick and were surrounded by a ditch. The settlers named this Fort Sod. Today, an historical marker on 10th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues designates the location of this early sod fort, where for 6 weeks in 1858, 35 men and 1 woman resided in the fort. We know quite a bit about the one woman. Her name was Rebecca Goodwin, and she sewed a flag for the fort out of old flannel shirts. And all of the men said that she could shoot better than any of them. In 1862, alarmed by the killing of Judge Joseph Amidon and his son William, Dakota Territorial Governor William Jayne ordered the evacuation of settlers to the military fort at Yankton for their safety. Three years later, with the close of the U.S. Civil War, the federal government built a military fort on the banks of the Big Sioux River. This fort was first called Fort Brookings, after Wilmot Brookings, who was very active in territorial government. It later became known as Fort Dakota. The military reservation was 7 miles wide and 10 miles long, most of present-day Sioux Falls. The law would not allow settlers or squatters to settle on military land. Fort Dakota was abandoned by the federal government in 1869, and through the efforts of Richard Pettigrew, this area was again open to settlement. This photograph that we're looking at was taken in the summer of 1866, and we are actually looking at downtown Sioux Falls. If we take a closer look, we will see the river running in the background. We'll also see the trees that were on an island at the top of the falls. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The stone building here is the commissary building where the soldiers kept their food. This building here is the officers' quarters. The 2 log buildings were the barracks buildings where the soldiers lived. And if you look closely, the dirt path right through the middle of our photograph here is one day going to become Phillips Avenue, our main street through downtown Sioux Falls. A young law student from Beloit, Wisconsin, Richard F. Pettigrew came west to earn money as a chainman for a U.S. government survey team. He was impressed with the area, and upon completion of his studies in 1870, he returned to Sioux Falls to live. He became active in the development of the city, along with W. W. Brookings, Charlie Howard, Dr. J. L. Phillips and his wife Hattie, and William and Inez Van Epps. Pettigrew worked tirelessly in those early days to bring businesses to Sioux Falls and to promote the growth of the city. In 1889, when South Dakota became a state, Pettigrew was one of the first two men from the state of South Dakota elected to the United States Senate. Pettigrew and Gideon Moody drew straws to determine who would get the full 6-year term, and Pettigrew won. When a new state comes into the Union, they send 2 senators to Washington, D.C. They don't serve on the same election cycle, so someone had to serve a short term. So Pettigrew and Gideon Moody drew straws. Whoever got the long straw got the long term. Whoever got the short straw got the short term. And Pettigrew won. In 1871, the first Cataract House was built at 9th Street and Phillips Avenue. This was one of the first hotels in Sioux Falls. The hotel's name let people know how close they were to the falls. Cataract means waterfall. And if we look closer here, this is the Cataract Hotel here, our first hotel built in 1871. Here we see the beginnings of this frontier town in Dakota Territory in late June 1873. We are looking at the west side of Phillips Avenue. The Fort Dakota Barracks building is still in use. Note the bakery sign out front. Other fort buildings were also being used. Charlie Howard built an addition onto the Fort Hospital and opened his general store. Dr. Josiah Phillips and his family were living in the officers' quarters. Richard Pettigrew's small land office is one of these buildings just to the south of the barracks building. Another was the store of early merchants, William and Inez Van Epps. Mr. and Mrs. Van Epps later constructed a building just north of the prosperous Cataract Hotel. The block became known as the Van Epps Block. This is that location in 1873. This is that same location today. Because of the Cataract's popularity, a larger and grander hotel was needed. A brick addition was constructed in 1878 just to the north of the original hotel. So in this photograph, we can see the original wood frame and the brand new brick addition. In 1882, the original wood frame Cataract Hotel was moved into 9th Street, and an entirely new building was put up on the original location. The original Cataract remained in use until the new hotel was completed. So on our photograph, this would be 9th Street, and this is Phillips Avenue. The original wood frame Cataract that sat here was moved over into 9th Street. They continued to use the hotel while this new hotel building was completed. From 9th Street, it was moved to Main Avenue between 8th and 9th Streets and became the Sherman Hotel. It was moved again about the turn of the century to 120 South Duluth Avenue. It remains there today as an apartment house. So this photograph shows the Cataract Hotel shortly after it was moved, and this is what the hotel looks like today. You are looking at most likely the oldest building in Sioux Falls, built in 1871. The grander Cataract Hotel, built in 1882 on the original 9th and Phillips site, was expanded with an additional upper floor about 1889. This hotel was destroyed by fire in June of 1900. This fire resulted in the start of a paid fire department for the city. The fire got started in the front display window of the Cataract Hotel, where there was a fireworks display. Each night they would light the display using gas lamps in the window. That night, when they lit the lamps, there was a large fireball that started some papers on fire that then started the fireworks on fire. The fireworks were shooting out of the front window and a large crowd gathered to watch it. The volunteer fire department was called and they thought they had the fire out, but the fire had gotten into the walls and the building was a total loss. It was such a huge fire that the volunteer fire department really couldn't handle it. And it was at this time that the city decided that they needed a full-time paid fire department. A fourth cataract was completed in 1901. The Cataract Hotel has always been the center of Sioux Falls social life. Perhaps with this in mind, street addresses were assigned beginning at the Cataract, radiating outward from the corner of 9th and Phillips, where the street numbering began. This system is still in effect today, which explains why house numbers on streets running north and south are 8 blocks off. In most cities, they start their street numbering at 1st Street, so the 100 block is between 1st and 2nd, and the 200 block is between 2nd and 3rd. But in Sioux Falls, we started our street numbering at 9th Street, so our 100 block is between 9th and 10th, and our 200 block is between 10th and 11th. So you simply need to add 8 when someone gives you their house number on a north-south street. If you have a 700 for a house number, you add 8, and that makes 15, and 15th Street is the nearest cross street. Today's view of 9th and Phillips marks the busy heart of the Sioux Falls Financial District. On the northwest corner of this intersection, where all of the Cataract hotels stood, is today's Wells Fargo Bank. The last Cataract was demolished in 1973 to build the Northwestern National Bank building, which became Norwest Bank and is now Wells Fargo. In the 1870s, travel from the Cataract and elsewhere in Sioux Falls was by horse or by foot. Commercial travel was by stagecoach. Sioux Falls had many different stagecoach runs. And here we see the stagecoach out in front of the Cataract Hotel. The recreated path of a southwest stage to Yankton can be seen on the University of Sioux Falls campus just east of the Mears Library. A marker was placed beside this trail, which was used as early as 1862. The marker reads, "Here is preserved a section of the old Yankton Trail and Stage Road. Over this trail, the people of Sioux Falls fled to Yankton under cavalry escort for safety, August 28, 1862. What a change in people's lives was the coming of the railroad. On August 1st, 1878, the first train steamed into Sioux Falls. The Sioux Falls Pantagraph, a local newspaper, reported the next day, quote, "We are all wonderfully glad that the iron horses got here, because it is what Sioux Falls has been looking forward to for a long time." Sioux Falls thus became a place where new settlers could come and get outfitted before heading out onto the prairie. In this photograph, we see the locomotive Wm. Crooks. The Wm. Crooks pulled the first train into Sioux Falls in 1878. The impact of the railroad was tremendous. The population of this little western town jumped from 600 to more than 2,000 in less than 3 years. Buildings were quickly built to accommodate the growing population. This 1881 hand-drawn map of Sioux Falls shows 4 bridges crossing the Sioux River. 2 of them carried the first 2 railroads. It appears that the city's southern boundary is about 15th Street, and there are just a sprinkling of houses west of Summit Avenue. In the next 7 years, Sioux Falls would acquire 5 railroad connections to the east. As a result, the city's population continued to grow by an average of 1,000 people per year throughout the 1880s. By 1890, the total population was just over 10,000 people. The same year as the arrival of the railroad saw the building of the first school. Irving School was constructed in 1878 at Dakota Avenue and 11th Street. Later, its name was changed to Central School. In this photograph, we see the large brick school building. In this cupola was the school bell, which is currently in the collection of the museum. Out front are wooden sidewalks and a dirt street. The church in the background would one day become First Lutheran Church, still in downtown today. In 1906, Washington High School was built in the same block as Central School. And if we look closely on the right-hand side, we can see Central School still standing. Today, Central School no longer stands, and the old Washington High has become the Washington Pavilion of Arts and Science. Also in 1906, upon her death, Helen McKinnon left $25,000 to the city of Sioux Falls to build a hospital. This photo shows McKinnon Hospital, which was completed in 1911. Present-day Avera McKinnon Hospital has been built up around Helen McKinnon's gift to become one of the largest hospitals in the region. This photograph is taken of the oldest section of the hospital that is still standing. None of the original building is there today. Another well-known school, Hawthorne Elementary, is located over a natural spring, an historic site at North Spring and 5th Street. Before settlement in this area, Native Americans came to bathe in the spring water. Settlers also enjoyed the spring, which became the location of one of Sioux Falls' first parks. They also bottled the water for drinking. This early photo of Heinsohn Springs shows a fountain, and if you look closely, you'll just make out the water shooting out at the top of the fountain. This fountain is in the collection of the museum. In the background, you'll see a church steeple. This is the church steeple of the First Catholic Church here in Sioux Falls. The Heinsohn brothers, August and Otto, in 1881, opened their Minnehaha Spring Bottling Company on the site. And this is an early advertisement for their bottling company. You can see that they bottled all sorts of things, such as ginger ale, champagne cider, soda water, and all kinds of mineral water. Part of their original bottling company can still be seen today. The building was incorporated into the construction of Hawthorne Elementary. Turning the camera from Heinsohn Springs, we get another view of Sioux Falls in the year 1878. The concentration of buildings in the center of the picture is downtown Sioux Falls. Josiah Phillips was primarily responsible for developing the downtown area. Upon abandonment of Fort Dakota, he laid claim to the land and purchased the fort buildings at auction. Dr. Phillips laid out the streets between 6th and 9th and the avenues between Phillips and Minnesota and sold his lots for early businesses. He was later honored by having the main street through downtown named after him. Another business which began in 1881 was the Queen Bee Mill. This was one of many business projects promoted by Richard Pettigrew. Built with money from George Seney, an Eastern investor, it took from 1879 to 1881 to construct. Its purpose was to grind area wheat for flour. An inconsistent supply of water led to failure of the mill. After 1916, it was used as a warehouse. Damaged by fire in 1956, the building was torn down by the city in 1961 for safety reasons. The ruins of this project still stand today on the east side of the river at Falls Park. Upriver from the mill, Seney Island was a favorite picnic spot. It was located approximately between 3rd and 5th Streets on the west side of the river. The island is no longer there. The river channel was filled by early 1908. Today, this area is home to the soon-to-be redeveloped Sioux Steel Company and a portion of the Greenway along Phillips to the Falls, along with the new Levitt concert shell. In 1882, North Main Avenue looked like this. We are looking south. At the end of the photograph, we can see All Saints Girls' School. Off to the right is the fire tower, which sat at the corner of 9th and Dakota. Off to the left are the trees on the island above the falls. The buildings in the foreground are the buildings of the Sioux Falls Brewing Company. A number of stone quarries operated in the Sioux Falls area from 1883 onward. Among the many public buildings in Sioux Falls built at the native court site are the Old Courthouse Museum, formerly the Minnehaha County Courthouse. Several buildings on the South Dakota State Penitentiary campus, the U.S. Federal Building, several buildings on the campus of what was the South Dakota School for the Deaf, the Washington Pavilion of Arts and Science, formerly Washington High School, Carnegie Town Hall, formerly the Civic Fine Arts Center, and originally the Carnegie Public Library, and the former Minnehaha County 4-H building, originally the county jail. In 1887, 2 years before statehood, Phillips Avenue was abuzz with activity. Streetcar lines were being laid for horse-drawn trolleys. Sioux Falls was indeed making progress. This streetcar belonged to the Sioux Falls City Street Railway, which was owned by Richard Pettigrew and his business partner Samuel Tate. Electric trolley service replaced horses, but ended in 1929 when it was replaced by bus service. Sioux Falls Transit recreated the streetcar look in this city bus that was unveiled in 2001. The first Minnehaha County Courthouse was built between 1889 and 1893. This early picture shows that it was not quite finished. Notice there's no clock in the tower. In this photograph, we will see the original jail building just to the north of the courthouse. In the background, up on the hill, is the original Hawthorne Elementary. Also in the background, we can see the home of Hosmer Keith, one of the largest homes in what is known today as the Cathedral Historic District. The clock was installed in 1893 and is still working today. The old courthouse is now the Old Courthouse Museum. While public buildings were frequently built at quartzite, homes were more commonly built of wood. The house on the left was the Lyman T. Dunning home. Dunning, a pharmacist, married Richard Pettigrew's sister, Henrietta. The house on the right, built in 1879, was home to Richard and Bessie Pettigrew and their sons Franklin and Arthur until 1911. Both homes still stand today between 8th and 7th Streets on North Duluth Avenue. This Queen Anne home at 315 North Prairie Avenue was built in 1885 for Judge Abbott and his family. Now let's take a closer look at this photograph. We can see that there is a drive up on the north side of the house where you could get out of your carriage in the snow or the rain without getting wet. There's a full wraparound porch, a tall tower, stained glass windows in the home, and also a very large carriage house. This home still exists today, but has changed considerably over time. It is now divided into apartments. A majestic Queen Anne home was designed by Wallace Dow, an early Sioux Falls architect, for John W. Tuthill, owner of 32 lumber yards in Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota. The Tuthill family lived here until 1926, and they continued to take care of the home for the next 25 years while it was vacant. It was then sold to the Catholic Diocese of Sioux Falls, by whom it is still used as a residence for the current Catholic bishop. The house is a blend of wood framing and quartzite. Pettigrews retained ownership of their original home until shortly after the purchase of this building, which we know today as the Pettigrew Home Museum. This beautiful Queen Anne home, an example of local quartzite use in home construction, was also designed by Wallace Dow and was built in 1889 for attorney Thomas McMartin and his new wife Jenny. It was purchased by Richard Pettigrew in 1911 for $12,000. In 1923, Pettigrew added a museum at the back of his home to display the many artifacts acquired on his travels in the United States and abroad. Mr. Pettigrew willed his home and museum to the city of Sioux Falls upon his death in 1926. A second museum addition was built by the city in the 1930s. Children enjoyed sledding near this 1872 Italianate home. It was the first home built in the neighborhood we know today as the Cathedral Historic District. The social prominence of its owners, Andrew and Imogene Phillips, made it fashionable to live in the area. The goal for these children was to start sledding up near the top of the hill at 8th Street and Summit Avenue and sled all the way down 8th Street until they got to the river in downtown. Now this home originally stood at the corner of 8th Street and Summit Avenue, but it was moved down the hill to its own backyard where it still stands today, directly behind the Pettigrew Home Museum. Impressive houses appeared in other parts of Sioux Falls as well. Hattie Phillips, who owned and operated the Phillips House Hotel and was the widow of Josiah Phillips, built this large house overlooking Colville Lake. The house was completed in 1885 and served as a summer home for Hattie and her 7 children until city roads improved and they could reside there all year long. In December of 1909, the home suffered a fire that destroyed the entire 3rd floor. The damage was never repaired. Hattie sold her estate to the city of Sioux Falls in 1916 to be used as a city park. The area is now part of Terrace Park. Hattie's house no longer stands there. It was torn down in 1966. The year is 1890. This view is of Phillips Avenue looking north. The building on the left is the Cataract Hotel. In the background, we can see the railroad bridges crossing the river. Also in the background, we can see just the top of the Queen Bee Mill. If you look closely up on the hill, we can see the buildings of the South Dakota State Penitentiary campus. The building on the right, built in 1887, is the Beach Pay Building. The Beach Pay Building still stands today and houses 4 downtown businesses. This is North Minnesota Avenue in 1890, looking southwest from 3rd Street. If you look closely, you'll notice small buildings behind these homes. These are outhouses. The street running in front of the homes is Minnesota Avenue, which is nothing more than a dirt track. Today, over 30,000 cars travel Minnesota Avenue north of 8th Street in a 24-hour period. What a far cry from 1869, when Richard Pettigrew came walking down this trail and viewed Sioux Falls for the first time. He said he never wanted to forget that scene and asked a friend to paint a picture from sketches he had made. The painting hangs on the wall above the fireplace in the dining room of his home, the Pettigrew Museum. The view is to the west. Notice the falls on the right-hand side and the island at the top of the falls. The concentration of buildings is Fort Dakota. The wagon trail here would be about 9th Street, and the low hills in the background would be today's Cathedral Historic District. What a debt we owe to these early determined pioneers. Wilmot W. Brookings, William and Inez Van Epps, Dr. Josiah Phillips, his wife Hattie, Charles K. Howard, Helen McKinnon, and Richard Pettigrew. Men and women with dreams for the future who laid the foundations then for the quality of life that we enjoy now. As we go about our lives in our city today, let us allow our minds to travel back to those early days and remember how things were then and appreciate and enjoy the fruits of those labors now. Then and now, a legacy for all of us to share and pass on to those that come after us. Thank you for joining us for Then and Now, Our Legacy. We hope you learned something new about the history of our community. If you're interested in learning more about the history of Sioux Falls, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, everyone, thanks.